Thank you for inviting me to Khaki Labs and for this talk, and I'm really excited about it. Um, so my presentation today is based on Pandita Ramabai's biography and its interface with Mukti Mission, a mission she established in 1899. Mukti Mission continues to be an important Christian mission in India, in rural Kedgaon, 100 kilometers south of Pune in western Maharashtra. And my preliminary observations today are part of a research project at the History Department of the South Asia Institute, Heidelberg University, that will result in a monograph on Ramabai. In my forthcoming monograph, I will analyze how Ramabai and Mukti were presented through photographs taken by European and American missionaries that visited Ramabai and Mukti at Kedgaon during her time, and keeping myself to the timeline in which Mukti's work overlapped with Ramabai's timeline, my research spans between the year 1899 and 1922, when Ramabai passed away. Some of the photos presented today document everyday life and work at Mukti that includes helpers, both foreign and Indian missionaries, teachers, and administrators, and the many hundreds of rescued girls and children rehabilitated there. In my work, I've broadened my analytical framework from perusing Ramabai's biography to the biographical photographic representation of various Mukti actors, as I have outlined above, in an effort to retrieve the voices of ordinary women who embodied Ramabai's Mukti work. Ramabai was a convert to Christianity and a staunch missionary, and Mukti Mission in 1905 became a primary Christian hub for Pentecostal revival in India. The Pentecostal revival at Mukti was a spiritual movement that preceded American Pentecostalism, the beginnings of which is dated to 1906 to a black church in Los Angeles. While Ramabai wrote many books, her greatest contribution is encompassed by her simplified Marathi Bible, translated in part from the original Greek and Hebrew versions, but in most part based on standardized English and American versions. Ramabai did not translate the Bible verbatim, but edited it, retelling the Christian message in a simplified manner that communicated the revival message to common people. It was free of the cumbersome intellectual and linguistic burdens of Protestant Bible translation and research endeavors. Ramabai's Bible was finally published in 1922 and printed in Kedgaon as she lay on her deathbed. The photos that I will use in my monograph, some of which I will show here today, are filmed by European and American missionaries visiting Mukti at Kedgaon during Ramabai's time. Not only were these photos developed and touched up at the Molkentala and Hames photo studio in Pune, in those times Pune, but many Mukti photos were also taken at the studios, the various different studios of the Molkentala. For my research, I've accessed the Mukti archives, photographic archives and collections on Ramabai at SOAS, which is an online collection in London, and at the All Souls College in Oxford that shares its Ramabai collection with Yale Divinity in the US. The many photos I use in my work are contained, moreover, in early biographical publications on Ramabai that are authored by many of her American missionary friends and other supporters. I've accessed these materials from special collections housed in the various libraries in Europe, UK, and the US, because these two by now are very old. So let me run through her life, which is one of the most important things for this presentation. Hailing from a Marathi Chitpavan Brahmin family from a village called Mal Heranji near Mangalore, Ramabai Dongre, that was the name, was born in 1858 in the sort of forested sylvan setting of a nearby mountaintop hermitage in Gangamul, built by her parents. Ramabai's father, Ananta Shastri Dongre, had converted from Shaiva beliefs and practices to the Madhava Vaishnav sect, and her parents had begun undertaking pilgrimages to Vaishnava temples from the very year Ramabai was born. Ramabai's first memories were, in fact, of these pilgrimages. She was the last of three siblings, and she was orphaned early as her parents and elder sister passed away in the Great Famine of the Deccan between 1874 and 1876. She finally arrived in Calcutta in 1878, accompanied by her only surviving family member, her brother Srinivas. However, by then, Srinivas's health had already deteriorated due to an unstable youth that was full of privation, austerities, and starvation. Ramabai and Srinivas, by the time they reached Calcutta, had already traveled nearly 4,000 kilometers on foot throughout India in search of livelihood. After reaching Calcutta, Ramabai soared to sudden popularity. Since she did not have any formal schooling and only had Sanskrit skills imparted to her by her parents, she had to be specially evaluated by Calcutta University in order to gain a degree. Not only was she awarded this degree in Sanskrit, but she was additionally decorated by the titles Pandita and Saraswati. The Brahmo Samaj, a prominent, influential Hindu reform group in Bengal, adulated Ramabai, and soon she and Srinivas befriended the Brahmos. However, his health already ruined, Srinivas died in early 1880, and Ramabai married his Bengali friend, a Kayastha lawyer called Babu Bipin Chandra Medhavi, in the October of the same year. Though she knew Medhavi as her brother's friend, she also married him so quickly as she suddenly had no family left. Though Medhavi was a Kayastha by caste, and Ramabai often referred to him in her writings as a Shudra, he was well connected in Brahmo circles in Bengal. Medhavi's whole family, however, apart from his cousin sister who welcomed the couple in her home in Shantiniketan, boycotted Ramabai. Ramabai and Medhavi had a daughter called Manorama in July 1881, and soon after, in 1882, Medhavi too passed away of cholera. Ramabai was left alone with the baby. And at this time, in April 1882, the Prarthana Samaj in Bombay, which was an offshoot of the Brahmo Samaj in Bengal, invited Ramabai to Bombay. Ramabai accepted the invitation and became member of the Prarthana Samaj. In June 1882 of the same year, Ramabai established the Arya Mahila Samaj that consisted of the women members of the Prarthana Samaj, and the organization expressed their commitment to women's education. In the same year, in 1882, Ramabai published her first book, Stri Dharma Niti, in Marathi, about the prescribed nature of women's moral values and duties. According to Ramabai's biographers, the arguments contained in Stri Dharma Niti were dictated by the interests of her Prarthana reformers and colleagues. In the September of 1882, Ramabai deposed before the Hunter Commission, stating that Indian women needed to be trained as doctors to help other Indian women who were shy to approach male doctors for their gynecological problems. And Ramabai's recommendations were so forceful that they impressed Queen Victoria in England. Earnings from the sales of Stri Dharma Niti allowed Ramabai and Manorama thereafter to travel to England in 1883, where Ramabai planned to pursue a degree in medicine. But she was diagnosed with natural deafness and could not fulfill her plan. In May 1883, Ramabai published a travelogue of Great Britain in Marathi that contained her impressions of the country and its society. She was tremendously influenced and impressed by Christianity at this time. However, in the following summer months of 1883, she underwent a personal crisis when her companion, who was traveling along with her and Manorama from India, a lady called Anandibai Bhagat, grew greatly perturbed with Ramabai's evolving interest in Christianity. Consequently, Anandibai poisoned Ramabai and also attempted suicide by ingesting poison herself. She had done this to prevent Ramabai from converting to Christianity. But though Ramabai remained unhurt, Anandibai succumbed and was ironically baptized on her deathbed. Depressed and lonely, Ramabai converted to Christianity in September 1883 at the mission of the Sisters of Wantage in England, much to the shock of Hindu reformers in India. By the end of 1883, Ramabai had joined the Cheltenham College for Ladies as a professor of Sanskrit, where she taught both men and women missionaries who were about to embark on traveling to India. But soon by 1885, Ramabai ran into conflict with the missionary sisters of Wantage, where she had converted, especially with her personal mentor, Sister Geraldine, who was deeply critical of Ramabai's individualism, a rebellious nature, a resistance to patriarchy, and her parenting style of Manorama. Geraldine accused Ramabai of holding on to Unitarian views instead of Trinitarianism, and of holding on to her Brahmanical and Hindu ways when Ramabai refused to eat meat and fish and wanted to engrave her crucifix with Sanskrit rather than Latin. Ramabai had some support in these difficult times from Father Nehemiah Gore, who was also in England at the same time. Tired of conflict, Ramabai left for the US in 1886, invited by Dean Bodley of the Medical Mission, Pennsylvania, to attend an old friend, Anandibai Joshi's convocation as one of the earliest women doctors of India. Ramabai stayed on in America for another 2 years, touring the country and lecturing intensely on the state of Indian women. She wrote another important book at this time in 1887 called The High-Caste Hindu Woman, which has been hailed as one of the most important Christian feminist texts emerging from India. Her lobbying for a residential school for upper caste women, widows in India, resulted in the formation of the Ramabai Association in Boston in 1887 that pledged to raise funds for Ramabai's home for a period of the next 10 years. Though this progression in Ramabai's life trajectory seems almost natural, I would read this as the major turning point of her life, when Ramabai turned deliberately from intellectual and literary pursuits to missionary activism. She returned home to India in 1889 with the Boston Association funds and, encouraged by her Prarthana Samaj mentors and friends, founded the Sharda Sadan in 1889 itself. Sharda was the first ever school and home for high-caste Hindu women in India, destitute women in India, and Ramabai also published her travelogue and impressions of the US in Marathi in 1889, in which she hailed American evangelical Christianity as a multi-sectoral space of individualism and freedom compared to the repressive colonial control exerted by British missions and missionaries. She meant Sister Geraldine, of course. Sharda in 1889 was first located in Mumbai, in Chowpatty, in a bungalow, and later, because of rising costs, shifted to Pune. Between 1890 and 95, however, Ramabai faced tremendous backlash from Hindu nationalists in Pune, especially by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lokmanya Tilak, who constantly wrote against her in the Kesari and derided her for her Christian conversion and her Christian leadership of Sharda. This criticism was especially in the light of the fact that a few of the Sharda girls had converted to Christianity. In this dramatic time of crisis, Ramabai responded by abruptly dissolving the Sharda Advisory Board that consisted of Prarthana reformers. Though she never gave up leadership of Sharda, Manorama, Ramabai's daughter, took over the management of the institution. Soon the institution split, with the secular part of Sharda consisting of non-Christian girls continuing under the leadership of Maharshi Dhondo Keshav Karve. The Karve Institute still exists in Pune, who had also married one of the adult Brahmin widows of Sharda. In 1896, Ramabai rescued many hundreds of destitute girls from famine-infested regions of central and western India and housed them in a new property that she had procured in the village of Kedgaon. Not only was the Sharda fracas with Hindu nationalists the reason for this separation from Pune, but Pune itself was ravaged by plague in 1897. The converted girls from Sharda joined the Kedgaon campus, and this is how Mukti Mission was born in 1899, exactly a decade after Sharda. But in contrast to Sharda, which imparted secular education, Mukti was a Christian mission that was uncompromisingly religious. It taught secular topics too, but it also taught religion. The establishment of Mukti as a home of Christian salvation, Mukti meaning salvation, or translated as such by Ramabai, galvanized missionaries from the Ramabai Association in Boston, the New England region, Europe, England, and Australia, and this larger group continued to support Ramabai even after the initially promised 10-year period of funding from the Boston Association was over. Mukti hence became an independent conduit for overseas Protestant missionaries, especially women interested in the evangelical Pentecostal message. These traveling missionaries marketed the mission globally. This included marketing Ramabai's life too, and beaming out Mukti's good work to the world in order to raise funds. This was especially important as Mukti was non or cross-denominational and did not have a head office abroad that was connected to a network of church funds that was allocated to overseas mission work. So Mukti funds had to be actively raised. Sponsors, adopters, and donors had to be actively and deliberately wooed. It was this marketing context that gave rise to the Mukti photo archive, which are the raw materials for my book. By 1900, it was said that Mukti housed about 2,000 girls. Manorama, who had headed Sharda in Pune, merged the part of the institution under her with Mukti in Kedgaon in 1899 as well as Kedgaon, as Mukti Mission was formed. Manorama continued to head Sharda school in Mukti. However, she succumbed, unfortunately, to heart disease at the young age of 40 in 1921. Ramabai was truly heartbroken and left alone again, and she passed away the next year in 1922, the same year in which her Bible was published. The Sharda school at Mukti was given government recognition in 1919, and Ramabai was bestowed with the Kaisar-e Hind Medal in 1919 as well, in recognition of her good work in the education sector. Ramabai authored two other enterprises after Mukti, and the first was her autobiographical and Christian testimony in 1907 that consisted of her conversion narrative and an account of the Mukti revival. And in the same year of 1905, of the revival, inspired by it, Ramabai embarked on the Marathi translation of the Bible that reconstituted the revival message. Ramabai is buried in the Mukti graveyard along with many other Mukti women. She is well known for her contribution to women's education in India, and the government of India celebrated Ramabai by issuing a commemorative stamp in her name in 1989. After starting her own mission at Kedgaon, Ramabai came to separate herself from the different denominational missions led by Europeans and Americans who were active in the Bombay region, like the Anglicans of CMS, Church Mission Society, the Free Church Presbyterians of the Bombay Scottish, the Lutherans of the Basel Mission, and the American Methodists. Denominational missions in the Bombay Presidency that included India offices had a colonial hierarchy that consisted of traveling and resident clergy and native missionaries, Indians, who were also defined by church bureaucracy. Defying all efforts to hierarchialize her or control her, Ramabai did not interact too deeply with native Christians from these missions either. Now, Mukti procured its first printing press in 1901, after which many other followed. And Mukti began printing its first newsletter called the Mukti Prayer Bell that reported on Mukti's daily life and Christian activities. The Bell was distributed quite extensively in international missionary networks, and essays in the Bell often lamented the cold tokenism of Indian Christianity. The Bell began to actively elicit prayers for a Christian revival at Mukti that would allow inmates to access a passionate Christ moment. Missionaries and Christian groups outside India who were receiving the Bell became actively involved as well in praying for a revival at Mukti by 1903. There were other smaller revivals before Mukti in small churches in Assam and Gujarat, news of which traveled to Mukti, of course, through missionary networks. But these revivals subsided after a brief inflammation. The Mukti revival took place in June 1905, catalyzed by the presence of American missionary Minnie Abrams, who was living in Kedgaon at the time. It was a large and more sustained revival, with many hundreds of girls receiving the Holy Spirit in what they experienced as a blaze of fire that descended upon them from the heavens in the Mukti church that one can see in this photo. This was followed by a second smaller revival in 1907. The revival shook Mukti to its foundations and shook Ramabai too. A spiritual moment when it was not she or the missionaries at the helm, but the girls who took leadership. The revival saw Mukti girls cry and pray incessantly, confess their sins, jump up and down, roll on the ground, shout and proclaim the Lord as they spoke in tongues. Immersed in paroxysms of prayer, they went without proper food or sleep for weeks. Minnie Abrams, that American missionary who was at Kedgaon at the time, testified that the Mukti revival constituted a precursor to the Pentecostal revival dated to 1906 in Los Angeles, that was better known as the Azusa Street revival, but Minnie said that the precursor to that lay in India at Mukti. But Mukti revival was also criticized as a form of mass hysteria by outsiders, and never forget what the Kesari wrote about it as well, which was similar. And this served to separate Mukti a little more from other native Christians at the denominational churches of the Bombay region. There were exceptions, of course. Not all the 2,000 girls at Mukti experienced revival. Not all the women in Mukti were even Christian. Though Ramabai prayed for them, she never forced any of her inmates to convert. And the same is true today. The girls are not forced to convert, since that would go against the very grain of Protestantism, which is based on conviction. The experience of the rapture-like event was thus limited to a few hundreds, and which was still a very large number. On the other hand, revival also opened Mukti to intensified Christian interest in international missionary support. And finally, Mukti revival generated a new turn in the history of Christianity in 20th century India, represented by hundreds of indigenous women of color from a colonized context. Mukti women emerged as global grassroots Christian leaders. Ramabai began her work on building the Mukti Church in the same year that Mukti was established, in 1898, and it was to become the site of the 1905 and 1907 revival as well. We encounter many photos within the Mukti archive of women standing outside the church, like in the earlier photo, or inside it. These photos were taken by visiting and resident missionaries at Mukti to demonstrate the Christian commitment and fervor of the Mukti women and to amplify their work in missionary circles. It must be accepted that Pentecostal and the somewhat top-down inflow of missionaries into Mukti brought in a flow of much-desired funds necessary for the upkeep of the girls. Missionaries who had supported Ramabai worked with a lot of labor with an aim to draw as much attention to Mukti as was possible so that it would attract even more international missionary interest, support, sponsorship, and donation. Mukti missionaries also encouraged Christians worldwide to sponsor individual girls as Bible women or adopt them and thereby absorb them into the international missionary domain. This immense marketing and creation of a brand Mukti had missionaries build a robust photographic archive of Mukti at the mission, rewrite intensified biographies of Ramabai, and celebrate the admirable achievements of the Mukti girls, all the while embellishing their writings with the photographs that they took. The Mukti photo archives thus contains many photos of women and destitutes who were rescued from famines. Mukti photos also often advertise as rehabilitation work by taking before and after photos of rescued famine victims, which I will show in some of the following slides. This was in addition to many such photos that showed rescued famine victims being fed in large groups. I'm sorry for the quality of the photo. As part of Mukti's mediatization, missionaries circulated photos of students in classrooms. I find this photo particularly interesting. Dated to 1903, the photo caption says that it is a classroom. But the children in the photo background are not in a classroom. They are in the dining hall with small eating utensils like salt shakers, I think, in front of them. The table in the front does not belong to a classroom either. The photo seems to mark a special occasion with small flower vases and flowers on the table. All the girls in the front, approximately of the same age, are attired uniformly in white dresses. The front part of the photo has been merged with the background photo. The two figures of the teachers in the background, one European and one Indian, are also pasted on later. This pastiche is ingenious and intriguing. If there was already the Sharda school at Mukti run by Manorama, what was the need to generate this doctored photo? And this photo was quite popular. I would argue that such doctored photos that required photography studios and specialists were made for a particular reason. The four girls in front were special. Either they were ready to be adopted or sponsored, and the figures of the teachers pasted in the back demonstrate the Indianness of the girls and their Indian education and the Indian nature of the mission, who were nevertheless prepared to adapt to international settings. The Mukti work was extensive and needed constant support. The girls needed a future and a legitimate exit plan, while some of the older ones were married or were employed at mission stations and households. Others were sponsored or adopted. If funded individually, adopted or sponsored girls wrote meticulous letters about their progress to donors, much like project evaluation reports today. They often sent their donors photos and other materials like handmade Christmas cards. We cannot unfortunately access these materials today as they are 4 or 5 generations old, if at all exist any longer. They are spread across many families in Europe and America and in the Commonwealth. Producing wedding and adoption photos were thus an important aspect of brand Mukti. In the left-hand photo, one of the girls lays her head on Ramabai's lap while looking at the camera. By doing so, she signals her preparedness to be adopted. The right-hand side picture shows a couple from New Zealand who adopted 13 children. Though the picture shows only 5, some of them babies, the couple are garlanded and shown holding flower bouquets. This seemed to have been a special occasion selected for celebration and photography. The mediatization of Mukti's younger women saw them arranged in smaller groups, looking comely, cheerful, companionable, and healthy. As I try to retrieve her voice from both these photos taken at a studio, and I again apologize for the quality of the photos, Subhadrabai's photo on the right side, where she sits on the far right corner in the second row, seeks to engineer an intimate scene of conviviality. Subhadrabai was an orphan and distantly related to Ramabai through the latter's father, Ananta Shastri Dongre's first wife, and her children. Subhadrabai became an esteemed worker and the head girl of the Sharda school, working directly under Manorama. In the left-hand photo, she stands next to a pedestal decorated with palm leaves. The palm tree is a frequent and recurrent motif in art history, found on imperial coins and medallions that frames the embossed subject as oriental. In the left-hand corner photo, Subhadrabai sits on a fore railing, allowing us to imagine a terrace of a home. But there's no scenery in the background, and the railing is in the middle of nowhere. Subhadrabai looks a little glum, holding a couple of flowers in her hand while leaning on the pedestal. This is a studio shot. Both are studio shots. So Manorama describes Subhadrabai's case as an orphan from Ramabai's half-brother's family who was rescued along with some other family members. Mukti records show that Subhadrabai was unmarried till the age of 28 and then given in marriage to an older widower from Nagpur who had children of his own from a previous marriage. In the second right-hand photo, there is a younger Subhadrabai and the caption describes her as a child widow, which she certainly was not. I have drawn on feminist scholarship here to retrieve some lost stories and voices of the Mukti girls who were represented in the ways that missionaries found interesting and who have become obscured in the publicity conundrum of brand Mukti. Missionaries did before and after photos, as I just mentioned, where they commonly swapped girls, as these girls were in any case unrecognizable to funders sitting far away. The right-hand side photo shows Gulab Bai as an accomplished Bible woman who was internationally sponsored. Again, sorry for the quality of the image. The photo is taken in the same studio where Subhadra Bai was photographed in the earlier slide, and it is the original version of the photo that has been cut out in the left-hand photo, which is clearer. In the left-hand photo, both Gulab Bai Jr. and Gulab Bai Sr. stand side by side in abstract space. And the right-hand photo, Gulab Bai Sr. is surrounded by the same palm fronds and the same railing that Subhadra Bai is. It's the same studio. Gulab Bai unfortunately passed away at the age of 23, and the Mukti newsletter, The Bell, praises her missionary sponsor abroad for being so kind to spend $1 whole over her funeral. I haven't been to Mukti in a while, and I have, of course, not been able to find Gulab Bai's grave. Mukti financial records certainly show quite a lot of expenditure on photography and photo development. The archives also contain threatening letters by donors abroad that demand the photos of their prodigies, threatening to stop the funding in case they did not receive any update. The swapping and mixing of photos was thus not intentionally neglectful. It was a response to a situation of financial crisis where images were a matter of availability. Remember, Mukti was not part of any denominational church which had head offices abroad and church networks that paid every week into mission work abroad. They had to raise their own funds from scrap, and they had to feed 2,000 girls in 1900 at least. The fact that the girls in Mukti looked uniform and were not easily discernible made them therefore representatives of a case rather than representatives of their own stories. Helen Dyer, one of Ramabai's closest allies, missionary friend, wrote many life accounts of rescued girls juggling their photos to suit the narrative. Tara in the top and bottom left-hand photos is the same girl child, and the photo is taken in a studio with those little pots next to her. In the adjacent two photos where Tara is an adult, the top one shows her holding some flowers, again a studio shot with the palm trees, and then below is a bride to a Christian man after she converted to Christianity. This is again a studio shot, of course. The palm trees are there, and there's a little railing again on his side. The right-hand photo has the same man. The man is the same in both photos, posing with another lady holding flowers who's also called Tara and traced to the same girl child of the left-hand photo. The man in both photos, being the same, is in one case dressed in Western clothes and in Indian dress. He holds a Bible on both occasions to demonstrate that he's a Christian. On the other hand, there is no way to validate whether the three adult Taras are the same woman. And this is perhaps the learning of this research enterprise. The photographed girls could not be differentiated, and therefore they could not, in many cases, be personally identified. Dressed and combed in uniform ways to look like each other, and often photographed along with Ramabai um, and Manorama, and with the Mukti walls behind them, their individuality grows slowly irretrievable. They represent the Mukti story and the Mukti good work, which was an important thing for their upkeep. But they do not tell their own stories of how their lives were. These case studies thus present us with a feminist methodological issue of retrieving women's voices from the institutions that were there in the colonial period. Mukti was not the only institution, there were many institutions. And the difference with Mukti only was that the woman who was at its helm was an Indian, and the Christianity was a very different one. That was the only difference. But there are many voices within the colonial archives of women that need to be retrieved. But Ramabai wasn't free of the missionaries either. They represented her too. So she was too also a part of Brand Mukti, no? But they produced her as a firebrand Christian feminist creator of Mukti, with Manorama being her shadow and inheritor. Ramabai always represented herself in photos and never represented a case story. That was typical of the Mukti rescue. She became overwhelmingly recognizable, especially when in disguise. I find the left-hand photo to be a good example. It's a studio photo with a backdrop illustration of the Taj Mahal or a Muslim monument with minarets. But she's overwhelmingly recognizable as Ramabai, even though purportedly in disguise. The right-hand photo shows Ramabai's power as she sits surrounded by her missionary friends from the Boston Association and the New England area. This is an outdoor photo, but in the way that Helen Dyer, her biographer, who wrote about three or four different versions of biographies of Ramabai, many editions of these, and many photographs. The way Helen Dyer presented it in her book, the background walls are blurred to make it look like a studio backdrop. This is actually an outdoor photo in which all the people are posing, or the missionaries are posing in front of the church building. But she has, so Ramabai is at the center, with Manorama resting her arm gently on Ramabai's knee to show their special bond. Their placement is also analogical to Mukti in the way it was seen in the missionary world. Both of them were at the core of the Mukti universe, and the names of other missionaries are not even mentioned in the caption of the photograph which I have kept. It just says Pandita Ramabai, Manoramabai, workers and friends. However, a photo studio specialist has taken the trouble for Helen Dyer to blur out the background so that the photographed women missionaries can be highlighted and brought into prominence, and the photo can be touched up to be seeming like it is a studio shot, and that they were important enough for the studio to have been booked and for them all to have gone from Kedgaon all the way to Pune or Bombay to get their photograph made. The Mukti photo archive has truly hundreds of photos of people that one has to really try and recognize. Not all of them are recognizable. But photos like this, which are replicated many times over, each one of them touched up a little bit differently, shows how there was agency that every actor was also exercising at the same time to reclaim. I mean, in this photograph, you see that how missionaries reclaim themselves and their work and contribution to Mukti by highlighting their own importance and not by seeing this as just another one of those group photographs at Mukti that took place outdoors. So though there are many other photographs that are to be analyzed, which I shall do in my forthcoming monograph, I rest my case today with these. I thank you for the opportunity, for providing me with the opportunity of the Khaki Lab has provided me to share some of my research. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deepra. It was just amazing. Like so many things you didn't really know about her life, and these photographs are just precious and really like really give you a different perspective. So thank you so much for sharing them with us. And I know you kept saying the quality was bad, but they looked very good to me. And I don't think, I think these are so unseen that,
Hmm.
it's still remarkable.
Hmm.
Anyway, we
Yeah.
have a couple of questions. One was that what made Pandita Ramabai travel to Calcutta or Kolkata now? And why would she go that far?
I think that the the sort of differences that are there within between the regions today did not exist in the same way. And
Right.
she and Srinivas had already walked, I don't know how many hundreds of kilometers going from place
Hmm.
to place in their
Hmm.
lives, starting from South India. I mean, they stayed for 1 year at Sri Venkateshwara, where they used to sing hymns and to the god.
Hmm.
And then they stayed for a while in Dwarka, then they stayed in Kashi, they went to Kashmir, they went to Bengal, they went to all the different pilgrimage places where they would perform austerities, where they would try to gain a livelihood of being paid by different temple institutions in return for reciting the Puranas and doing religious music, bhajan, kirtan, and would gain their sort of livelihood through
Hmm.
religious tasks. And so there wasn't really something so Bengalish about Calcutta. They just traveled everywhere that they could. So there must have been some occasion for her to go there. And
Right.
yes, and then at some point or the other, it's an interesting question though. What made that? She doesn't write much about the sort of point in which she suddenly decides to get a degree. She
Hmm.
realizes that she doesn't have formal education except for the one that's been given to her by her parents. And at a certain point of time, she realizes that this is a place that I can gain a degree or that I should gain a degree.
Ah,
And
okay.
though the sort of juncture in which she turns from an intellectual to an activist is clearer in the American case, this juncture where she turns from a Hindu pilgrim with her brother and her
Hmm.
family suddenly decides to sort of gain an education or be evaluated for a degree. So she doesn't write much about that in the testimony, but it's an interesting question. I have no clue.
Okay, that I think that was a good answer anyway. Um, there was also a question of you spoke about her being deaf. So how did she manage all this with this kind of loss and this
Yeah, yeah,
disability?
yeah. So this was a very difficult thing for which she could not um, enter into any of the professions, and
Hmm.
she had to go back into the life of being an educator. And yes, these were severe. And I mean, there are accounts of how Bai was an an exceptionally good lip reader and
Ah,
understood everything that was said to her at her face, but nothing
yeah.
that was said behind her back. And so this is metaphorical. Bai didn't catch or didn't want to catch any of the criticism either. If people
True.
spoke to her straight on, she answered.
Hmm. Okay. And do you know who actually gave her the title of Ramabai? Like Pandita. Who gave
Yeah,
her
it
that
was the
title?
Yeah, I mean, the Calcutta University, and in that time there was a good bit of interaction between people who were there in Calcutta University and the Brahmo Samaj, and it becomes
Hmm.
really blurred about where the Brahmo Samaj and the way they adulated her and they made her really famous, and the way that took off and influenced the Sanskrit department's decision. And since she was evaluated for
Hmm.
Sanskrit, and anybody who becomes evaluated for Sanskrit becomes a Pandit, she became a Pandita. And I think so. It's like the titles like Shastri or Pandit, which are
Yeah.
provided for people who are
Yeah.
evaluated for Sanskrit degrees. So Pandit
Right.
and Pandita, I think, are a part of that. But I think
Yes.
Saraswati was very much a part of the Brahmo Samaj because of her
Hmm.
oratorial skills.
Okay.
She could speak extensively in Sanskrit, and it was something, since Sanskrit was also a language which was being retrieved so much by the reform groups of that time, of going back to the Vedas, and she impressed Dayanand Saraswati so much. She impressed
Hmm.
everybody who was working in Sanskrit at that time because she just
Hmm.
knew how to talk. in Sanskrit and hold forth, and had an enormous knowledge of the religious text that she had been reciting. And this was something that suddenly brought forward an entire conglomerate of the Brahma Samaj and the Sanskrit department of Calcutta University that then evaluated her and adulated her and gave her that title. And so, yeah, she's written a lot about these small little incidents in her life, but you have to also see that when she writes the Christian, her testimony, which is basically a conversion narrative, she has elided over so many of these smaller details that were in the past, where she became a Pandit and Saraswati and so on, which was not as important to her as the revival and what was happening with all the girls and at Mukti. It became a little cosmos. And yeah.
I mean, I know you've covered this, but somebody's saying, what was the reason for her conversion to Christianity, and was it because of the social structure in Hinduism at that time?
It's a difficult question to answer because one never exactly knows why one really took a decision. One felt that way. I mean, this is true for every decision that we take in our ordinary life as well. Why do we decide at a certain moment of time to make a very big step? Why would a researcher like me suddenly take a step to come and live in Germany? I don't know. It was a mixture of many things. And one can't really put one's finger on this is why. So, of course, there was this entire context of patriarchy. There was this entire, yes, there was this entire context of patriarchy. There was this entire context of, look at her life. Her life story was a context. She grew up in that small hermitage, which was, she was born there in that small hermitage on top of a hill in a forest where her parents had sort of set it all up. The rest of the family in the village, somewhere a little bit of a distance away. She's at the age of 7 or 8 when her mother starts teaching her extempore all the Vedas and the Puranas and things like that, and starts teaching her Sanskrit. At this time, at 6 or 7 or 8 years of age, where they are still traveling, doing pilgrimage to different places, her father was already in his late 70s. He was already very old, and her mother was his second wife. And so, in a sense, just think of her life. They go from place to place, slowly they die. The parents die, the sister dies, the brother dies. She's alone in the world. Then she marries his friend. Then he dies. Then she has this little child. She has nobody else in the world. Everybody is against women. Everybody tells her what to do. She has this independent spirit. She's quite rebellious. She's critical of patriarchy. And then there is Sister Geraldine, who's on her head, who's saying, you're such a bad person. You're such a bad mother. You're so rebellious. You're not, you're thinking of all this Unitarianism, which is Vedantism, basically. And that's not Christianity, which is Father, God, Holy Spirit, 3 different Trinitarian things, the church, bureaucracy, hierarchy, you're a bad person. And in all this, there's this entire feeling of being completely isolated. A young woman who wanted to go ahead, really help other women. She goes deaf, first in 1 year, then completely. And she has nobody whom she can really refer to as a savior in this. And her parents and her brother died doing all these austerities where they would fast all day with just 1 spoon of milk, and they wasted away, and they'd grown cold in their hearts towards whatever they had been doing, and they were dying off. And she really had these questions about being saved. There was a time when she actually even wrote somewhere, I don't need Christianity, I need Christ. She needed God. She wanted to have these questions in her life. Which there was, of course, patriarchy too, but that's also to talk of her conversion versus patriarchy becomes too instrumentalist, the cause. I mean, when is it do we really convert, or do people really convert for some benefit? Whether it be getting out of patriarchy, because you know what, she had felt Geraldine's church patriarchy as well. She knew that Christianity had its own patriarchy. So she didn't want that either. So patriarchy is inescapable, whichever religion you go to. Wherever there is a masculine-centric, patrilineal, patrilocal, patriarchal system, you can't escape that violence. But to say that she converted because of some benefit that it gave would be to say that she wasn't convinced at all, which wasn't the case. So I think, this is my estimation of it, I think what she did in her life was firstly, she became completely alone. She became completely isolated with this little baby girl that she had with her. There was nobody in her life.
Yeah.
And his family had turned them out, and there was no support base. She was on her own. And this was already the end of the 19th century. And people hadn't even, if you were to read Sri Dharmaniti, it is still a sort of patriarchy friendly text, which Ramabai's biographers have pointed out to, oh, how this was really the reformers at that time who said, okay, we will look after women better, but women should not look after themselves. We have to be their saviors. So, in a sense, there was still the patriarchy within reform movements at that time, which she didn't want. And so, I think her conversion was a part of these personal reasons, which they always are. And
Yes.
I also think that that's the reason why she rescued girls. She looked at those girls as a reflection of her own past, her situations of helplessness, nothing to eat, on the road, everybody else dead, nobody to save. And this is exactly what she was also rescuing. She was rescuing herself every time.
Yeah, it's really a remarkable story. Okay, I have a couple more questions. Were you able to trace any of the girls and any of their stories?
Yeah. So I have some on Subhadra Bai, I have some on Gulab Bai.
Okay,
There's
that's
Tara.
amazing.
So yeah, there are 2-3 cases that I've briefly talked about. So I will hope I was hoping to so I've been through the archives, and there are these small ways in which these stories are referred to, but I'm never sure whether these stories have been swapped as somebody else's name, whether, because this is a part of brand Mukti, yeah? This is a part of
Yes,
advertising it. And so
yes,
I'm never sure of how to fix the name with the person, the photograph. As you saw, Tara was 3
yeah,
different adults at the same
yeah,
time.
yeah.
And I don't know exactly how to do it. One of my reasons, or my frustrations with it, is that there aren't any voices from inside the mission. There are no voices that belong to the girls. And there are, of course, no voices that ever go against Ramabai. And they were very grateful to her, and they were saved by her. And one of my feminist reasons is to search for voice. I mean, I would invite anybody sitting today in any of the Commonwealth areas or other areas who have ancestors, who've had women ancestors in Mukti, to come forward, write, not necessarily give them to me, but write their own family stories, because we have lost women. We've lost the women in our family.
True, true. That's really true. Okay, couple more. If you're up for it. Was Pandita Ramabai conscious or worried about how her role may have contributed to reinforcing a stereotypical view of Indians, like that they were not smart, that they needed saving, colonial benevolence? Was she conscious about her role in maybe contributing to that stereotype?
Hmm.
If she did.
I think this knowledge that India had become impoverished through colonialism was something she knew. I think her critique of colonialism, her critique of the British, her critique of the missions, which are English, is aware of the fact that colonialism has itself produced the poverty and the starvation, and has rescued people from the starvation that it produced to make themselves into heroes. I think she was aware of this, though she doesn't say it. But I think it's implicit in the way she says, or she understands, that they have created the problem and now come as rescuers so that they can become heroes. So the creation of the impoverishment is an act of self-aggrandizement or hubris.
Yes.
I think she realizes this, and this is where her intervention as somebody who was an Indian woman who could save herself and did not require either colonial or masculine support to do that comes into play. I don't think she was
Absolutely.
furthering a stereotype
Okay.
because this stereotype was created by the British, wasn't it? That, oh, these poor people.
True.
Firstly, by creating the conditions for it, and then
Yes.
coming in as saviors.
Yeah.
And I think she was aware that they were masquerading as heroes when actually colonialism was the very reason for these problems. So I think what she was trying to do was to participate in that stereotype in order to break at least the part about rescue, about we didn't require men and white men to rescue us. We could rescue ourselves, we could educate ourselves, we could become professionals, we could do whatever we wanted. And I don't think she was, she was participating in it to break it. She did break it. I think the only caveat to this, which can't be escaped even today, is that she was an upper caste woman. She was a Brahmin. She was not a woman from the lower caste who was rescuing herself. She was still an upper caste woman. And that's the only caveat. But that's true for so many of us. When we try and do anything that would help others, we can't help the fact that we come from certain elite backgrounds, which allows us to even understand that the problem is present and that can be addressed and that funds can be brought from outside and something can be done. And
that's true.
And yeah, it's a conundrum that we face till today. So many of us are elite, even though we put our funds, our interests, our time into these causes. And we can't help it. She couldn't help it. She could only disguise herself like she has done in the last photo. And
that's an amazing.
That's the only caveat.
Yeah. Okay, there's another question about whether her social work became very dependent on like external funding, especially American funding, and did that restrict her in some way? And like it seemed like she had to be that brand. So was that like,
yes,
did that funding
come
with
question.
some? Did that come with some,
strings
caveats?
attached?
Like a lot of funders, the funding
Yes.
does. Yeah.
Yes. So, yes, it's a good question. It's a good question because it's true. It's true because, and this is true for all of us. We all have employers. There are strings attached. And we all have funders. I have a funder, very taxing, very demanding. And yeah, there are strings attached, right? And so the whole point is, yes, she had, and she couldn't control these missionaries after a while. She grew older and older. She retreated more and more into her Bible translation, which took up 10 years, 15 years of her time. And these missionaries, the association in Boston and Philadelphia, these people that supported her, that raised funds for her, who went around all over the world, had these little conferences about Ramabai and the cause of women in India, raised funds, published books, published photos, got sponsors, got donors. These were the people who were working with her, who were united with her cause for these girls. And of course, it brought in restrictions. And the biggest restriction that I face today is not being able to differentiate Ramabai as the author of these photos from the missionaries. In the beginning, when I started this research, I said, oh my God, Ramabai has made all these photos. And it took me some reading and understanding to see that she had actually already retreated. It was the missionaries who were doing the Mukti work and who were raising funds and who were getting the children adopted and sponsored, who were doing the mediatization, because that was important. Even today, you have to mediatize, you have to show photos, you have to show videos, you have to.
Yes. On social media now, different medium. But yes,
but it's a part of raising awareness.
Same concept, yes, same concept.
You have to raise awareness. How will people know what the good work is? So there were lots of the archive is full of letters to and fro. Why is this like this? Why is that like this? improvements that are undertaken, feedback forms. What do you like about Mukti? What do you not? What do you want to change? And I think Mukti is still open to that. I mean, they've still got a huge register, and you can still write there what you don't like, what you feel there should be. There should be a water tap here. There should be this. There should be that. How to raise funds for it. This is a huge question that still is there. It's an orphanage. It's a home. Lots of girls
That's quite
there.
a modern approach for that time.
Yes, yes. And they really wanted to cater to the girls. And that's one of the things, we have this view about missionaries and, oh, they're there only to exploit us. And be that as it may, I mean, some of the women missionaries that she was working with had a completely different and, I must say, a maternal approach. There was a lot of maternal approach there about the girls and about what would happen to them and about who was sick and who had dropsy and who was to be prayed with. Day and night work, dashing from southern to southern, these little houses inside where the children were, or the boys were, or the girls, or the orphans, and praying and helping, and the medical and the clothes. And it was a lot that these missionaries were also doing. We're really committed. So I think women missionaries are also different. There's not too much work done on women missionaries as either in India. We know of missionaries as families or men, or people who ran missions, but we don't look at these individual missionaries who attached themselves to causes and did a lot of good work there.
Yeah. I mean, barring Mother Teresa, I think, yeah, there are many unsung heroines. Yeah.
Yeah, there are
Okay,
problems there, but yeah, yeah,
yes, it's
yeah.
complicated. It's
Oh,
complicated.
yeah, yeah.
It's not a very straightforward thing. Yeah.
No.
Okay, you were speaking of letters, and there was another question called Princess Kartini of Indonesia in early parts of 1900s. There are mentions of how she was influenced by Pandita,
Oh,
especially in her struggle against patriarchy. But do you know if there was any actual communication between these two women?
no, not
Okay,
in the mission archives.
okay.
Not in the mission archives. And so there are these three versions of the mission archives today, and all its contents, which are reports and letters and papers and notes and logbooks and
Hmm.
registers and all of this has been digitized by one Mr. Lutzweiler. He has
Hmm.
placed this entire digital copy at Yale Divinity,
Okay.
and there is a version of this in Oxford. Going to India to Mukti Mission and looking at it in even more detail for all the letters contained in it, in which the digitization
Hmm.
has not been good, is itself a task. But it would be great if there would be Indian researchers who would do this. I'm not a passport holder of India anymore, and I'm afraid to go and work with missions
Hmm.
in India. So it would be great if these are questions about what were the other international figures that she really contacted and whom she influenced. This is a great topic for global relations between
Yeah.
Ramabai and other leaders. And this could really be picked up by people who would pay more attention to the mission at Kedgaon and go there and stay and look at the papers and do their research. This would be a great contribution.
Mhm. Okay, Vinita says that I know a lady from her Mukti mission and her ashram in Pune, and they had a mother system. And she said this lady was from her hostel in Pune in 1975. And she also says that she gave her daughters for adoption overseas. That I'm presuming it's this other lady.
Mm.
And somebody else says that there's a lady in Canada who did this too. She gave good education to adopted girls via the missionaries and girls from very poor backgrounds today, and that continues today as well.
Wow, great work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then, of course, there is lots and lots of praise for your very, very detailed and amazing talk. But we're done
thank
with
you.
all our questions. And thank you once again for joining us. And
I'm
it
deeply
was
honored.
really delightful to see these photographs. And thank you, everybody else, for attending as well. And we will see you all next Saturday for the rest of our talks. Thank you.